Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Jorvik and today we are looking at Vikingtok, what it means to be a modern Viking, as well as looking at real-world paganism and how the two connect. I want to be very clear in the beginning here. I am not of Nordic descent, at least as far as I know, and I would not be making fun of the Nordic people or their culture. I actually find their culture and languages very fascinating. I also want to point out that I am not an expert in Viking history or Norse mythology, but I am actively learning those topics. This video is really targeted at Americans specifically who think they are Viking, even the ones who are of Nordic heritage. I feel like where a lot of people get confused is that they are grouping all Nordic people to be Viking, but we will get into that later. Let's just go ahead and dig in, shall we? I don't see anything entirely wrong with portraying yourself as a Viking. Okay, it's just that there is a lot of history that needs to be discussed, especially if you're not Scandinavian. Now, the idea of practicing Norse beliefs and pretending that you are Viking, I think, are distinguishedly different, and we will discuss more of that later. Again, it's just that a lot of these people I see just like the aesthetics of Viking, which more or less aren't entirely historically accurate. So in this video, we're going to be looking at some talks that I've curated that kind of shows different aspects of the modern Viking. Some of them will be educational, which, yay for that. I will also throw in my own knowledge where I see fit, because this is a topic that I have been studying for the last few years. First, let's just look at the definition of Viking. According to Britannica, the word Viking is defined as any of the Scandinavian seafaring pirates and traders who raided and settled in many parts of northwestern Europe in the 8th to 11th centuries. On the surface, that shouldn't apply to anyone today. And to the average person, these people just seem like they're adults just LARPing the Vikings TV show. Even then, the term Viking comes from the Old Norse word Vikingur, which meant pirate or raider. I feel like the closest thing that I can relate to is that if Hispanic people in Florida can call themselves conquistadors. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I don't see anything wrong with Nordic people reconnecting with their heritage or their ancestors, which you could argue that Nordic Americans are also doing, which is fine and honestly is something I think you should do regardless of your heritage. Honestly, I think I'm just jealous of Nordics that can just dress up and do reenactments in their ancestral land, and arguably some of the most beautiful places on the face of the earth. Let me show you what I mean. We will march into the night, when the fears again the rise. Ha, got you. There was a couple reels snuck in there. I just think that, first of all, let's just go back to that first one, right? Because the one where they are, it just looks dumb. And I know the guy on the right, his name is David Christensen. He's not entirely bad. He's actually a Norse pagan. He does a lot of information on his channel. The other guy is named Peyton Parrish. He is the de facto, like, TikTok Viking music. Actually, no, I don't consider him to be a Viking artist. I actually think he originally started as a Christian artist, but I don't know for sure about that. I know a lot of people don't like him in the Norse pagan community. If you are on TikTok or Instagram Reels or even YouTube Shorts and you see a lot of Viking material, I would say probably about 8 times out of 10, the music that they're using is from Peyton Parish. But again, that's a whole different conversation. I don't want to get into it here. But yeah, and then with the guys walking, like, I wish I had friends that would do this with me. Like, I think this is cool. I do. I do think that if I had the opportunity to travel to Norway or Sweden, I think it's mostly Norway from what I've seen, and just do like a Viking, go on like a Viking ship and then just like sail through fjords. Oh my God, I would love it. I've always been drawn to the mountains and to like forests. I mean, I have a mountain tattoo and a forest sleeve. I know, you, gross. And we'll get to tattoos later. Don't believe me, we'll get to that. And it's weird, like, when you keep going down this hole, it seems like the only thing for women to do is just to do, like, Valkyrie makeup, which have a whole different thing of issues, like using wrong symbols, using chin stripes, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. It's just, there is a lot of those, and not saying that they're bad, it's just these people need to do their research. And again, we'll get to, especially the chin stripe thing, that's a whole different controversy. The last 2 reels that were played, that's awesome. Like, it's kind of like a dude ranch, right? It's like how like people want to go and pretend to be cowboys for a weekend. I do want to go and pretend to be a Viking for a weekend. I think going to Norway and like I said earlier, going to Norway, going on a Viking ship, living in like a Viking village and like wearing era appropriate clothing, just, oh my God, sign me up. Sign me up. The next talk is going to be a little bit longer. I believe he's from Norway. I'm not 100% sure, but he is a tattoo artist, and he is very blunt when it comes to Nordic tattoos, and especially if you pretend to be a Viking. Honestly, I think he's great. So let's just go ahead and check this out.
Viking tattoos that you should not get, part 2. I have these opinions because I tattoo Nordic tattoos on people. Viking tattoos on people. Even though the Vikings probably didn't have tattoos. Who the fuck knows? Do not get Ragnar Lothbrok's fucking head tattoos on your fucking head. Or anywhere else on your body. Because, 1, they're in a fucking TV show. And 2, they're fucking terrible. Think about this. The Vikings made insane artwork. If they had tattoos, they wouldn't be tattooing them blindfolded, drunk, high on fucking mushrooms with a chisel in the dark. Okay? And Ragnar Lothbrok's tattoos are clearly made by someone who's fucked up on psychedelics. They are terrible. Also, they're not Viking age. The style used is style 1 and style 3. Style 3 can arguably be said to fall just within the cusp of Viking age, but probably not around the time that Ragnar Lothbrok was alive. And I know that they're all shamanistic and shit, but if the Vikings did tattoos, they would have done amazing shit with it. And Ragnar Lothbrok is like the king of fucking Viking kings. He would have had amazing tattoos on his head. He would have had beautiful adornments. If you want to get those tattoos, fucking do it. If you already have them, good on you. I'm not actually that upset about it. I just get riled up about things I'm passionate about.
The reason why I wanted to showcase this video is because I plan on getting my own Nordic inspired tattoos, and he does bring up a few good points. In media, whether it be Vikings, The Last Kingdom, AC Valhalla, tattoos are random, and they always show like a series of runes or common Norse symbols, or even symbols that aren't actually from the Viking age at all, and we'll get to that later. The next video really illustrates home the point of doing your research from trusted sources, so let's take a look.
do not fucking do this. Don't do it. Because first of all, this rune she's talking about here, it's not a rune on its own. It's a bind rune. It's a combination of 2 runes. And depending on how you read and interpret it, it's actually a combination of 3 runes. 3 runes with 3 different meanings. The first one she uses here is Gebo, and Gebo just looks like an X. It means gift. The second rune she used here was Tiwas, and Tiwas literally means Tyr, as in the Norse god known as Tyr. So yes, this means that the god Tyr had his own rune. It was this one right here. And that rune very, very specifically and unquestioningly represented Tyr and Tyr alone and nothing else. Now, this right here was the rune, the bind rune that, you know, she marked onto her fucking skin. But okay, look right here. You see right here, you see Tyr, right? And then you see the X, Gebo. But here's the thing about bind runes. When you do bind runes, you have to be real careful about their construction. Because not only did she use the rune for gift and the rune for Tyr, which can already be magically interpreted as gift for Tyr, but also the other rune that she may not have even intentionally used is right here on the side. You see how on the side, it looks like this, you know, like that C? Well, that's another rune that she didn't account for. And that rune is called Kenas. Kenas means torch or fire. So, y'all starting to see where I'm coming from? Y'all starting to see why I don't think you should put this on your fucking body anywhere? Because you're technically marking yourself to become a burnt sacrificial gift to the god Tyr.
People who don't do their research and just get Viking tattoos on them because they think that they look cool don't really understand what they mean, especially when it comes to runes. If you follow the path, you know that runes are powerful, and when written down, they can invoke the gods or spirits. Now, I personally don't believe in rune magic, but that's a different conversation. There are 3 major runic alphabets, historically speaking. There is Elder Futhark, which actually predates the Viking Age. There is Younger Futhark, which is from the Viking Age. So if you wanted to get any runes tattooed on you, I would recommend using this particular alphabet because it is Viking Age. And finally, there is like an Anglo-Saxon Futhark, but that was used much later and has nothing to do with Old Norse or even Proto-Norse. That was more like a medieval language for Old English. There is another YouTuber named the Welsh Viking, and he has a great video explaining the runes and how not to get a tattoo, so I highly recommend that, and the link to that video will be in the description. There are other runic sets that I will talk about later. However, they are related to white supremacy, so that's cool. Another thing I see a lot is people trying to translate English words into a Futhark rune, which that's not how that works. From my understanding, particularly the Younger Futhark was used with the language Old Norse, which, one, is a dead language. However, there is a close modern day counterpart, which is Icelandic. Now, I'm not saying that everyone with rune tattoos don't know what they mean. Obviously, there's a lot of people out there who follow the path and do the research and understand what they're putting on their body. Which brings us to chin stripes. Oh boy, chin stripes.
Let's have a quick chat about this one, shall we? You have 1.5 million TikTok followers, and you're spreading misinformation to every single one of them. Those markings you put on your chin, they're a close practice for the Inuit indigenous peoples. They're not Viking, they're not Norse, they're not Scandinavian, they're not Irish, and they're not Celtic. There are indigenous women who go missing or are murdered every single day. And I'm sure there are some other indigenous women who are afraid to get their traditional tattoos or markings as to not be targeted. And yet here you are on TikTok, singing a little song, wearing these markings like it's some kind of costume. Not only are you misrepresenting the Norse community and the Scandinavian culture and heritage, but you're appropriating native culture and heritage by wearing these closed markings like they're some kind of costume. I know you see the comments. I know you watch the stitches. You know what you're doing. You're making money off the back of the indigenous peoples, and you don't care. And that's fine. But I'll keep holding you accountable every time I see you do something disgusting like this.
Chin stripes is another thing that I see a lot when it comes to Viking looks. I will admit, I was victim to this when I was just a naive little boy.
There is a singular topic at the center of my platform. It is almost certainly critique of pagan chin stripes. I've been picking apart the use of chin stripes in popular alternative makeup styles well before I had any kind of social capital to wield. It is the very first issue that I talked about when I joined TikTok just over 2 years ago. It's why most of you even find me in the first place. And this is why I keep coming back to it. I, as an individual, can talk about sources and inspiration and visual coding till I'm blue in the face, but until the communities in which this kind of stuff pops up decide that it's socially unacceptable, nothing changes. Our artists, influencers, and creatives will continue to show their asses, whether by ignorance or malice, and in this way serve as a bellwether for our capacity to do better. 'Cause if we can't even get our own folks to do something as simple and straightforward as skipping a 2-inch vertical stripe of eyeliner below the lips, how the hell can we be trusted to wrangle the much more difficult task of denazifying our spaces and tradition?
It's kind of funny because we actually don't have any evidence, historically speaking, of Vikings using face paint or even having tattoos for that matter. However, there is evidence of Nordic art, as shown here. So the style this guy is using, and pardon my Norwegian, is called Hingereik or Hingeriki. I don't know. I'm sorry. But it's this. I will put it here. So this style has been found on rune stones. And so if you wanted to get a tattoo, I highly recommend finding someone who specializes in this particular style. That way you can get accurate, like, tattoos if you want something that's Nordic. This word is a style I personally would love to learn, just so I can design my own tattoos that mean something to me. And there are plenty of great resources out there that you can in fact learn this style. Okay, so let's move on to music. It seems that when you are watching these videos, it's always 2 or 3 songs. Usually it's Valhalla Calling by Peyton Parrish. Not going to talk about it. Or My Mother Told Me. That's also sung by Peyton Parrish, but is covered by like 50 other people. And I guess My Mother Told Me is technically a Norse poem, but the English version is different from the Old Norse version, obviously. I don't remember where the poem is from. I guess I can look it up and just put it here. But it tells the story of a 6-year-old boy named Inga who actually kills another boy, and then the men have a fight which leads to more death. His mom was like, hey, that's kind of tight, man. I think you're going to be a great Viking. To which Inga recited this poem, mind you, at 6 years old. Dr. Jackson Crawford, who is an expert in Viking history, if you are any way into Viking history, you probably know who he is. He actually has a great video. It's pretty short, but he kind of goes over this, and he goes over the poem in more detail, and he actually reads it in Old Norse. Which is kind of cool. So if you want to check that out, that link will also be in the description. Now, there is nothing wrong with listening to this kind of music. I, for one, love Heilung, who is great live, by the way. If you have a chance to see them live, do it. Now, their music is not really Viking, in my opinion. I think it's more Germanic, and it could be considered as like an alt history retelling, but they do have a lot of Norse influences. There is also Wardruna, Danheim, and of course my favorite, Ivor. All of these artists have been reconnecting, I guess, with what this kind of modern take of Viking music would be another YouTuber named, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, but it's Faraji, I believe. He actually recently did a video on modern Viking music, which I highly recommend if you're at all interested in this topic. So again, that link will be below. So the next video is going to kind of lead into the next chapter. So I just want you to go in with an open mind, okay, and just, see where it takes you.
So here are my top 3 tips on how to get into paganism. Tip number 1 is to determine what you mean by paganism. Paganism is a practice other than the 3 main world religions. And to be frank, when I was Christian, I was told that everything that isn't Christianity is pagan. Because from the Christian perspective, they're all false gods. So step 1 is to know what you mean by pagan. Step 2, I'd recommend that you don't limit yourself to one belief right off the bat. Now, I can only speak from my experience, but as an eclectic pagan, I dive into many beliefs and I feel very free to build my spirituality. I personally find it much easier to learn without being fully headfirst into one belief. I find that I learn so much better when I'm open-minded. I'd probably start by looking at the philosophies of the afterlife in different belief systems. There are so many different perspectives on what happens after. And that leads you down a whole path. And tip number 3, and this one's important, keep in mind that no one knows everything. You might run into people that tell you exactly how you need to be in their eyes, or to believe exactly what they believe. But in your spiritual journey into paganism, the journey is your own.
So let's talk about religion. And I should preface that I do not want to invalidate anyone's beliefs. I want to have a respectful discussion on this topic. And you're probably wondering why I care so much about this. And it's because that I am a practicing Norse pagan. And like other religions, Norse pagans have their own beliefs, our own symbols. And recently we have been roped into this group of LARPers as well as other groups I will talk about here shortly. I grew up in the American South, so I had no choice but to be Christian, but about 12 years ago I became an atheist, and I would probably say that around the start of the pandemic, so probably late 2019, early 2020, I started to dabble in Viking history and mythology. Yes, I will admit that I did watch the Vikings TV show, loved it, and that I am probably one of the 10 people in the world that enjoyed Assassin's Creed Valhalla, but that's because I studied the history and the mythology, so just made that experience during the game just a lot better because I could understand the world more, if that makes sense. Don't get me wrong, I think LARPing is cool. I mentioned it earlier, like for real. I would love to go to a Renaissance festival or even a Viking festival, they're around, but I do not identify as a Viking. And in fact, most pagans that I've encountered or met also do not identify as a Viking. In fact, most think all these LARPers are cringe. It is a blurry line, though, because a lot of Norse pagans, obviously, they celebrate holidays and transitions of the season. But the difference is that most of them don't dress up and put on historically inaccurate makeup. I also should mention that paganism is a very broad term, and that covers many different belief systems, not strictly Norse, but really any deity worship. Paganism, or heathenry, as it's also called, like mentioned in the video before, is a belief system that's not of the Abrahamic religion, specifically Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. If you want to get technical, I am what people call an animist, which means that I believe in like objects and places and creatures all possess a distinct spiritual presence. So I'm really like a nature dude. I just do it through the lens of the Norse gods. Honestly, talking about it kind of deserves its own video, so if you want that, let me know. Norse paganism has many different symbols that we use, and I feel like that's where a lot of the overlap comes from. The main one is Mjolnir, and that is Thor's hammer, which I have mine on right here. And yes, I recognize that most people are going to associate it with the Marvel films, but I assure you that Mjolnir has been around long before the Marvel films. In fact, there have been some archaeological digs in some known Viking sites that have discovered miniature Mjolnirs that could have been used for ritual practice. This is just a modern symbol for Norse pagans. That's all. And other people in pagan faiths also wear this. It's kind of just like a universal symbol. Other symbols that I should have mentioned earlier, but I feel like they have a better place here, are the Aljashimar and the Vigvasir. It's funny that these symbols show up a lot in Viking media, and it's seen as like some runic magical staff from the Viking Age, when in fact it's actually from an Icelandic manuscript that was written in the 19th century, nearly 1,000 years after the height of the Viking Age. What's even worse is that these staves are actually tied to Christianity more than they are Norse paganism, or Vikings for that matter. And don't even get me started on pagan holidays and how they were taken and appropriated by Christians. That is a whole different conversation. There's just a lot of misinformation out there when it comes to Viking history and paganism. Unfortunately, a lot of history was lost when that part of the world was being Christianized, when pagans were just being slaughtered just for believing in their gods. I don't want to make this whole video about paganism. I just wanted to mention it here because there is a lot of overlap between Norse paganism and the modern Viking craze. I also want to mention that a lot of people think Norse paganism is a closed practice. It's not. And I don't know why this is going around. Wait. No, I do know why it's going around. Fine, let's just move on to the last part of this, and that is the darker side of the modern Viking craze. Okay, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the frost giant in the room. Yes, there are white supremacists and alt-right groups that try to tie themselves to Norse paganism and this whole modern Viking craze. I will say that they are their own thing. We do not own them. We do not advocate. We do not accept. We just do not allow them to be anywhere near us, adopting our symbols, and just we just don't approve nor accept them.
I have a question, and I don't really need to say what audience it is, but once I ask the question, they'll know. Why do you come onto my page and get upset about a black person practicing Norse paganism and then say if white people were to do the same thing to black culture, it would be an issue? Why do you feel that way?
It's been a big problem dating back to the no-no Germans of World War II and a little bit before that as well. Adopting Norse symbols that unfortunately are still used today by white supremacist groups. Some include the Valknut, Mjolnir, and runes, as I mentioned before. Obviously, most people who use these symbols are not racist, or are they a part of white supremacist group. And, like I mentioned, we will happily disown anyone who uses our symbols for hate.
Chill and repeat after me. Cali Park, it's not Atlanta. It's not Atlanta. Clayco is not Atlanta. Decatur is not Atlanta. Gwinnett is not Atlanta. Roswell is not Atlanta. Fort Paul is not Atlanta. Lynburn is not Atlanta.
The only thing we can really do is educate people and to take our symbols back from these disgusting losers. You're also probably wondering, how can I tell the difference? And well, besides the obvious beliefs of what the alt-right holds, there are a few groups that you should be aware of, especially if you want to follow the path of Norse paganism and don't want to get roped in with the wrong crowd.
The Vinland love nature, black metal, and authoritarianism. Oh my god. By the way, I'm making this video so y'all know about them, not because I support these guys. So the Wolves of Vinland are a group of weightlifting, MMA fighting, tattooed, motorcycle-obsessed skinheads who also sort of love ecology and the environment too. The name Vinland, by the way, is the name that the Vikings gave to North America when they landed here in about the 1300s, and now it's sort of turned into this like common historical reference point for white nationalist groups to basically say like, actually, Northern Europeans were here first. Anyway, the Wolves of Vinland are a neo-pagan group that's basically just a cult of masculinity and self-help ideology. For the Wolves, nature represents this sort of like timeless hierarchical order that provides an alternative to the emasculating modern world that we all live in now, plagued by things like feminism and diversity and multiculturalism. Their worldview is one of inevitable social and ecological collapse, after which, of course, the real men will restart the world in accordance with nature. I mean, they're basically just a male supremacist group. Some people call them a white supremacy group. They're probably that too. Intense ritual culture, which involves blood sharing, animal sacrifice, getting tattooed, and sort of just getting drunk in the woods with the boys. I mean, it's sort of just like if all the metalheads in high school got together and started a frat. Took it a little too far. One of their most prominent and weirdest members is this guy called Jack Donovan, who on paper is gay, but actually rejects gay identity entirely and instead identifies with a hyper-masculine androphilia. I think the most interesting thing about the Wolves of Vinland is their sort of like appeals to nature as this like gendered masculine utopia. I mean, historically speaking, pagan groups in general have sort of been this really common way for gender and racial identity groups to start to fuse with national politics. In fact, tons of other pagan groups like the Asatru and Odinists have always been internally torn on this issue of racist and non-racist factions within the ranks.
Yes, so the Vinland Wolves are just one of many Norse alt-right groups. That video did a great job of explaining what they are and what they're all about, but I feel like the biggest and most prominent groups would be the Odinists, and of course the Asatru Folk Assembly. Gods, I just hate giving them breath, but let's start with the AFA.
You don't want to be like this. This is disgusting. This is awful in every way. If I could kill it, I would. But I legally can't.
So the AFA is a group of Norse pagans that believe in folkism. These people believe that only white, Northern European descent people are allowed to be Norse pagan, which I think is what comes back to the whole closed practice thing. And that the rest of us are just faking, and we're not allowed to. They were founded in 1995, although there was a group previous to them in the 70s and 80s. They also consider themselves to be Asatru, which is what the modern Norse pagan religion is called, originated in Iceland, I believe. Of course, their beliefs are racially motivated. I should mention that people who identify as Asatru are not all alt-right or white supremacists, so keep that in mind. Odinist or Wodinists, as they also call themselves, however, are more in line with white supremacist groups. The Odinic Rite defines Odinism as a natural religion for Northern Europeans, and so naturally they were categorized as a white supremacist group who also believes in folkism. Remember that word from a paragraph ago? And what they believe is racial preservation and promotion, and to have as many kids as possible. I don't know, sis, kind of sounds like you're being a little Christian coded, but that's just me. They also believe that nationality is biological and not geographical, which also isn't correct. They clearly have never studied history. It's just they are very bad people and you should stay away from them. So I don't want to talk about them any further. I don't want to give them life. I don't want to give them breath. I'll let the gods handle them, and nature and any other gods in the world handle them. But just know that if your homeboy comes to you and says that he wants to join a Viking club and that he mentions Odin or Odinist, you should probably have a talk with him. It's just really hard, because I would love to proudly wear my Mjolnir outside, and for the most part I do, but I mostly wear black shirts if you haven't seen from any of my videos. So it does blend in a lot, so it's not as seen because it's also black. But it's just really difficult, to explain to people that I'm not a white supremacist, or nor do I associate with those people. And like I mentioned earlier, it's, for the most part, is that all of us who are in this community need to rise up and take our symbols back. And I know that's easier said than done, but like I said before, education is key. The more people who aren't in our community that are educated about these symbols and what they really mean, and not what a group of sissy boys think it means, I think will go a long way. So, what does all of this mean? Well, in this video we talked about Viking cosplayers, we talked about cultural appropriation, we talked about paganism, and we talked about the people that no one cares about. But I think my man here sums it up pretty well.
There are no Vikings about, and there never really had been anyone who were Vikings. It was like a moniker that was put on people that attacked the shores of England and France. It was a term that was used very loosely.
If you think that you are a modern age Viking,
you're delusional. You can be a modern pagan, you can be Nordic, you can be Scandinavian, you can be Asatru, you can be all sorts of fucking things, but you're not fucking Viking. Do things that is Nordic and cool, and be happy that that's what it is. Don't get it into your head that you're a fucking Viking. It's enough. Fuck off.
To close out this video, I will say that yes, I am a Norse pagan. No, I am not a Viking, and neither are you. Get over it. But honestly, look, if you do identify yourself as a Viking, all the power to you. I am proud of you, for being yourself and to be living your best life. Unless, of course, you're an Odinist or a white supremacist. You guys are cowards, and I hope you all burn in whatever afterlife you believe in. Don't want people to take this video and just assume that all Norse pagans are Vikings, or that all Vikings are pagans, or that all pagans are white supremacists, and etc., etc. I just want people to be educated. Because, like I said earlier, a lot of misinformation is out there, especially when it comes to runes, tattoos, and Viking history. I myself am currently learning Swedish and Icelandic, and while I've only been practicing for almost a year, I have been enveloped in this world for much longer than that. I want to say that if you are interested in Norse paganism, or any form of paganism, for that matter, all I ask is for you to just do your research from trusted sources. There are plenty out there. Just be careful about the type of rhetoric you are reading, and if you want to study runes from the Viking Age, only study the runes of the younger Futhark. It's easy, just Google it. I swear it's easy. Like I said, just do your research on the path you want to follow, the deities you want to follow. And to my fellow brothers and sisters, Skål. Okay, I think that does it for this video. This did take me a while to make. Obviously a lot of research, a lot of curating was done. So if you got this far and you enjoy the video, please give it a like. You know, I'd love to do more of these video essays on things that I am passionate about. I don't really plan on doing a video on my practices. I never really intended that, but if you want that, I guess let me know. Anyways, guys, my name is Jorvik. See you next time.